I asked what my power was, already tasting disaster before Lilith answered. When she calmly said gotcha, every dream I had of ruling the world cracked at once, right in that silent room. I slammed the table so hard pain shot through my hand. I had become a demon king today, yet my grand ability sounded like a cheap joke from another world before my reign could begin. I shouted that even dogs and cows got better gifts. How was I supposed to conquer humanity when my legendary power could only make people laugh before my first war began? Lilith explained I could earn more abilities after conquering the world, but I had no points. Her calm voice made the insult feel heavier, like chains around my new crown. I demanded she summon the great demon king. I had praised that ruler for years, but now every blessing in my mouth twisted into a curse I could no longer hold back. When Lilith said the great demon king copied a game system from another world, I felt my rage collapse into disbelief. My destiny had been chosen like a toy by boredom. I forced myself to breathe and accept gotcha. Maybe the ability had hidden value, I told myself, though my swollen hand argued against that hope with every painful throb. I asked for the basic ability, anything at all. Lilith reached into her bosom and pulled out a tiny box, and my patience nearly shattered again under her calm stare. She called it a gotcha box with a smug calm that begged for violence. I reminded myself she was my only contact here, so I swallowed the urge and waited for power. 10 boxes lined the table, each one carrying my future. With trembling hands, I pressed the first button and waited for my destined servant to appear in glorious light. Light burst across the room, and my heart climbed with it. I expected crimson fire, a fortress, or a dragon, but a tiny slime blinked before me with innocent eyes. I stared at the slime, then at Lilith, trying to understand how my empire had begun with something that looked softer than kitchen jelly and weaker than my pride. I threw a chair in fury, but Lilith dodged and calmly charged me 12 gold. That was the moment my reason finally snapped, louder than the chair hitting stone. I lunged at her, screaming about the slime, but she shoved me away like dust. I hit the floor and realized my secretary was stronger than me, the new demon king. I pounded the floor in humiliation as the first day of my reign collapsed. A demon king should command fear, not be bullied by his secretary inside his own chamber. Lilith reminded me there were 9 boxes left, while the slime pressed close with a pitiful little sound. Somehow, that tiny comfort made everything feel worse. I stared at the slime and wondered if farming would be wiser than conquest. Maybe crops soaked in magic could conquer the world more reliably than my cursed gotcha. Lilith said gotcha could summon any monster, and bad luck had chosen slime. If fortune turned once, the next box might still bring a dragon worthy of my throne. I pressed every remaining button, chasing one miracle after another. Light filled the chamber, faded, and left 9 more slimes with one young demon girl on the floor. I saw the small succubus apprentice among the slimes and almost laughed from despair. It was not another slime, yet it still felt like fate mocking my crown. I stood before Astrea and felt my pride rise like fire. If anyone saw her presence and still doubted the demon king's throne, they had no soul for terror. When Astrea mentioned my graduation disaster, I could only laugh and scratch my head. Even the great demon king had heard how badly I had ruined that ceremony. Astrea said breaking the world was always the work of someone insane. The moment she granted me the throne, my heart beat like conquest itself. I imagined crimson fire, machines that forged anything, or a crown that ruled monsters. Every senior had received greatness, so I waited for mine. Astrea promised an ability that could do anything and summon anything. I held back my rising tail, convinced my legend was about to begin. Then she named it gotcha, and my thoughts went blank. I blinked before the highest throne, unable to decide if I had misheard fate itself. A magic circle opened beneath my feet before I could argue. I shouted for Astrea to explain, but the floor had already begun swallowing my future. She repeated the word like I was the problem. I screamed that she was joking, but Astrea only told me to do my best while the circle dragged me down. Only my head remained above the circle when fury finally beat manners. I cursed the great demon king herself, and then the abyss took me. Pressure crushed my face, and breathing turned strange. When I opened my eyes in the office, 9 soft bodies were smothering the demon king who should have terrified mankind. I lifted one slime and stared into its watery eyes. It looked back so innocently that all I could do was squeeze it and call this entire reign a nightmare. Beyond my misery, humanity trembled under 72 demon kings. Yet my first castle on the surface was only a tiny cave beside farmland. Lilith approached with her golden eyes and asked if I needed her. I laughed like a broken ruler, surrounded by slimes wriggling over my so-called body of terror. I told Lilith about the dream of receiving my ability, but she asked what the problem was. That calm question almost made me explode again. I stood up and sent the slimes bouncing across the floor. A demon king candidate should conquer the world, not negotiate with jelly valley in a cave. I complained that even farmers could kill normal slimes. Lilith said mine were different, and I hated that she was technically right in the worst way. They had no corrosion, no fangs, no menace, only bounce and physical immunity. I stared at them and wondered how terror could be this soft. Lilith reminded me it was not just slimes. I looked toward the young succubus sleeping nearby, then back at her with a stare cold enough to freeze the cave. Lilith told me to understand my ability first, comparing me to a weak demon king who rose through proper use. I wanted to believe her, but belief needed evidence. When I asked how to use this cursed ability, Lilith went silent and pulled out documents. For the first time, the answer looked worse than the question. I listened as Lilith said my ability was highly probabilistic, and every word made my blood boil. A demon king's fate should not hang on luck. I demanded the details because she was my secretary. If I had to survive with cursed boxes, then someone had better explain the rules before I broke them. Lilith handed me the document, and I read each mission slower than the last. My lips curled because every line looked written to mock my army. The missions promised boxes for impossible tasks. Wipe out goblins, occupy a village, find words for someone who had more than slime and shame. I crumpled the paper and threw it at Lilith, but she dodged without effort. Even my anger kept missing her, which somehow made everything worse. I wanted to grab her collar, but my body remembered defeat. Her strength was beyond mine, and even my rage had to admit it. Then I lost patience and lunged anyway. The struggle lasted barely a breath before I found myself pinned near the wall, beneath my own anxious slimes. Lilith straightened her clothes and told me I was severely lacking. My aide had trained since childhood to serve me, yet could still flatten me. She said the tasks were difficult but possible. I brushed myself off and finally understood the truth. The problem was not effort, but the ability itself. I declared that gacha was fundamentally wrong for a demon king. If demonkind lived by struggle, then I would struggle against the gift itself. I ordered Lilith to open the gate. I would visit the great demon king, recite the treaty, and prove this ability was a mistake carved into my throne. Lilith said no demon king had ever received a new ability after the first grant. I heard her warning and stepped past it like a closed door. I told her again to open the door, and this time my voice carried no tantrum, carried negotiation, rebellion, and the last scrap of my dignity. Humans imagined the demon realm as a barren slaughter pit, but the city before me breathed like any civilization: black stone, crowded streets, and pride. It had been my first visit since academy graduation. Black towers stretched above me, and the statue at the fountain made my chest tighten with memory. Then I remembered the brats who hated me at the academy. If they appeared now, my grand negotiation might become another public disaster. Demons kept staring as I walked, and I hated how visible I had become. A demon king was rare even here, which meant hiding was impossible. Lilith realized I had graduated from the elite academy after all. I saw the thought cross her face. Somehow this eccentric failure was still an elite. She asked what kind of commotion I caused, but I cut the topic off fast. Some memories were safer buried before the wrong demons heard them. I changed the subject and asked Lilith her last name. For all our arguing, I realized I barely knew the woman standing beside my ruined destiny. I changed the topic, and Lilith sighed like I had committed another crime. Only then did she answer with a name that made my thoughts stop. Gastria was not a name anyone ignored. I knew that lineage, and hearing it from my secretary made her quiet burden feel heavier than before. I thought a famous lineage meant expectations and pressure, but Lilith denied it with a crooked smile I failed to see because I had already turned away. I told myself I had to work harder, then reach the massive gate. The black castle rose from darkness, the same nightmare throne I never expected to face again. I walked toward the guards and declared my business with the great demon king. Behind me, Lilith muttered like my disaster had finally reached its natural form. The guard handed me a waiting ticket. 12th turn. I came to challenge divine injustice, and bureaucracy struck first with perfect accuracy. The castle overflowed with demons seeking judgment, help, trade, or survival. Even terror needed schedules when too many desperate voices reached one throne. I remembered why tickets existed. A sick former ruler had nearly collapsed under endless duty, so even the great demon king's castle learned working hours. 2 hours, they said. Lilith refused to leave because guarding me was her duty, though her eyes kept wandering over the room's strange gloom. I told her no one came here cheerfully. Extinction, ruin, and near death filled the seats, and I had walked in carrying humiliation instead. Then I realized this was where that guy operated. My stomach tightened because some demons ignored common sense whenever grudges were involved. Before I could explain, a shrill voice tore through the room. Red lightning cracked across the air, and every waiting demon ducked except me. The lightning was faster than my body. Lilith launched herself forward, wrapped me in her arms, and took the blast meant for my useless crown. The explosion hurled Lilith into the wall, and my breath vanished. When I saw the red red mark where lightning struck. Panic crushed every insult inside me. A sharp girlish voice complained that she had attacked me, not Lilith. I turned and saw a tiny red-haired demon wrapped in a ridiculous cloak. I yelled that she had attacked out of nowhere, and she shouted back like I was the villain. Her face reddened with anger before reason even arrived. Lilith spoke through pain, warning that attacking a demon king could not end peacefully. Even wounded, her voice held more authority than mine. Bethesda snorted and said consequences meant nothing because she and I were the same. That single sentence made the room colder around me. Lilith asked who she was, but I refused to answer. I had met many insane demons, and Bethesda stood proudly among the worst of them. Bethesda flared her cloak and declared herself the chaotic demon king, ruler of a tenth of the surface, and my sworn enemy. My waiting turn had become war. Lilith stared at Bethesda in disbelief. The girl looked almost too cute to fear, yet the air around her felt nothing like an ordinary demon. When Lilith confirmed the name Bethesda, relief touched her face for only a breath. Then the title behind that name crushed the room. The four sovereigns were not ordinary demon kings. They had crossed into the surface, expanded by conquest, and made even dragons acknowledge them. Despair, sorrow, madness, and screams. Their names carried disasters like banners, and Bethesda stood among them as the ruler of Rampage. Lilith bit her lip as the gap became clear. Bethesda could erase us if she wished, and Karis somehow knew her as an enemy. I shouted that I was a demon king too, only a few years late. Bethesda called me an idiot protected by his secretary and dared me to come. I reminded her how often she lost at the academy. She called those fights practice, and the hatred in her eyes said this time had no rules. Mana gathered in Bethesda's hands, thick and violent. Thunder crawled through the narrow room, and every demon waiting there chose survival over pride. Sweat ran down my back as I stepped away. Bethesda's mana control had been monstrous at the academy, and becoming demon king had only sharpened it. At the academy, rules had stopped us from crossing the line. Here, no safety measure stood between her hatred and my very fragile life. I tried to negotiate, asking her to think about where things went wrong. Bethesda answered with raised lightning and a simple command to die. Shockwaves rolled from Bethesda's raised hand, and the waiting room began to break. This was no school fight. This was death wearing an old grudge. My face went cold. If Bethesda killed me here, Lilith would be bound to follow my end, whether by duty or the darkness afterward. I begged Bethesda to calm down, and even I hated how thin my voice sounded. A demon king should command fear, not request mercy. Then Lilith stepped forward. Bethesda looked puzzled, as if protecting me made no sense, but Lilith knew my death would drag her down too. Lilith called her Lady Bethesda and chose reason over force. She warned that killing a one-week demon king would stain even a sovereigness name. Bethesda hesitated, and that tiny pause felt louder than thunder. Pride could restrain what mercy never would, and Lilith had struck the right nerve. Lilith pressed further, reminding her where we stood. Even Bethesda could not ignore the cost of causing chaos in the great demon king's waiting room. Bethesda lowered her hand at last. The lightning faded, the room breathed again, and I understood that Lilith had saved me with words I lacked. Lilith asked her to calm down, but the waiting room was already ruined and empty. Even demons had nightmares, and Bethesda had become ours. Lilith told Bethesda to leave for now, promising a meeting once I had grown stronger. I nearly choked, because meeting her later sounded worse than death. Lilith gave me a look that said silence was survival. If I answered badly, leaving peacefully might be impossible, and lightning would finish the argument. I asked if she was angry, and Lilith denied it while turning away. Somehow, that calm denial felt more frightening than Bethesda's thunder. Bethesda kept her head lowered as Lilith tried again. For a moment, the room held its breath, and I almost believed reason might survive. Bethesda snapped that she did not need any meeting. Then lightning exploded again, and Lilith braced herself against a force that tried to shove her away. Bethesda shouted that reputation and punishment meant nothing. She only remembered what I had done, and her hatred aimed straight through Lilith toward me. Lilith asked what I had done to make Bethesda this furious. The way she asked made even me wonder if I had forgotten something worse. I explained she had picked a fight first, so I answered in kind. After that, she claimed I almost killed her and growled at me forever. Lilith looked more confused with every word I spoke. Bethesda's rage felt like life and death, not an old-school quarrel I could shrug away. Bethesda twisted her lips and clenched her fist. One word left her mouth, and the lightning answered like a verdict. Lightning spread in every direction, turning the waiting room into ash and panic. Lilith bit her lip, knowing demon strength could not stop a demon king. Lilith seemed ready to accept the end, wearing a disappointed smile. Then I moved before fear could stop me and pulled her aside. I lunged into the lightning myself, stupid enough to meet death head-on. The strike hit me and then vanished like it had never existed. Lilith stared at me and whispered about magic magic nullification. I wanted to look impressive, but even I had no idea why I still stood there. Bethesda asked why I was alive, and I answered honestly, I did not know. For once, neither killer nor victim understood the miracle. Bethesda raised her hand again, certain the next strike would work, but her magic dissolved before it could gather, leaving only disbelief in her palm. Bethesda raged, but nothing happened. Lilith rose in confusion, and I stood there feeling less like a hero and more like a mistake with legs. A resonant voice declared that Bethesda's magic had been blocked. The weight of it forced even her to kneel as the room groaned again. Astrea said she had sensed an aura outside her office and would reprimand the guards. Bethesda's cold sweat told me the real nightmare had arrived. The massive door opened, and Astrea stepped into the wreckage. She asked if I liked her power, and somehow Gotcha became the least terrifying thing there. I sat in Astrea's office with Bethesda and Lilith, surrounded by documents instead of corpses. Somehow, that made the silence feel even more dangerous. Astrea poured tea herself, and Bethesda nearly panicked from reverence. The same girl who threw lightning now trembled before a teapot. Astrea told Bethesda to sit, reminding her she had unleashed magic outside the office. Bethesda shrank back, gaining nothing from all that rage. I called Bethesda an idiot under my breath, because fear had never protected my mouth. She growled back, and death sat right beside me. I accepted Astrea's tea and thanked her calmly. At that point, fear felt useless, because every road ahead already had death waiting. Astrea laughed at my confidence after everything I had said to her. Lilith shouted in panic, but the great demon king only looked amused. Astrea forgave my rudeness, saying I could handle at least that much. I nodded awkwardly, unsure whether I had survived or been studied. Then Astrea turned to Bethesda, and the room changed. Forgiveness left her voice, and pressure swallowed the sovereign of Rampage whole. Bethesda screamed and released magic, but Astrea's force shattered it like glass. Her small body began to bend under power she could not resist. Astrea said Bethesda had crossed the line by disrespecting her. The words were calm, but the pressure made the entire office creak. Bethesda tried to endure, but her breath broke under the weight. Astrea reminded her that such power had not been granted for childish revenge. Then the pressure vanished. Bethesda hunched over, trembling for air, and Astrea smiled as if she had only closed a book. Astrea said the incident would not be overlooked and told Bethesda to reflect. The proud sovereign answered with a weakened apology. Astrea finally turned back to me and asked why I had come. I shook off the chaos, because my complaint still needed a throne to hear it. I asked whether Demon King abilities were unique. Astrea said yes, and the answer placed sacred weight on the very flaw I had come to expose. I said my ability was flawed, and the office seemed to pause. Even Astrea and Bethesda looked surprised by the weight of my accusation. I took a breath and said abilities were the essence of a demon king. They should inspire awe and fear, not make my enemies laugh. Astrea chuckled. Bethesda stared at me like I had lost my mind, and Lilith quietly closed her eyes as if accepting a doomed assignment. Lilith seemed to realize the dice had already been cast. If she had been assigned to the wrong demon king, silence was all she had left. Bethesda muttered that she knew I was crazy, but not this insane. I kept facing Astrea anyway, because turning back no longer existed. Astrea asked why I thought my ability was flawed, and her smile made the question worse. She was not angry, which meant she wanted to hear me destroy myself. I said a demon king's power had to inspire fear and awe. Even weak abilities could become legends if they matched the terror of the throne. I remembered Dracuria, who drank human blood and turned victims into corpses that walked. Simple power or not, humans feared the meaning of it. Then I named my own curse. Gotcha sounded like a gambler's toy, not a demon king's essence, and the awful odds made it even more shameful. I shouted that 10 summons gave me 9 slimes. How could I conquer humanity when my first army looked like it belonged under a child's boot? Astrea asked if I wanted a different ability, and I answered yes without hesitation. Survival had become a bigger dream than conquest. Astrea noticed again that I had no magic at all. For a demon, that empty body was unnatural, and even her curiosity sharpened around it. Astrea admitted my point was valid, then smiled and refused anyway. I had proven the flaw, but she wanted the entertainment more than justice. I shouted why, and Astrea laughed that watching someone like me survive in the human realm would be amusing. My suffering had become theater. Then Astrea turned to Bethesda and named her punishment. The room tightened again, and even Bethesda swallowed before answering. Astrea said she would strip Bethesda of Demon King status for now. Bethesda's face went blank, because even terror had not imagined that price. Astrea spared Bethesda's own power and forces, saying a proxy would rule in her absence. The punishment was cruel, but not hopeless. Then Astrea smiled and named the condition. Bethesda would serve me as her lord. Our screams overlapped before either of us could breathe. Bethesda tried to protest, but Astrea moved first. Flame burst from Bethesda's palm, carving a sigil that stole her title in silence. Astrea placed constraints on Bethesda: obey my orders and never harm my subordinates. I stared at the sigil, unsure whether I had won or doomed myself. Astrea said that should do and sent us back to the surface. A magic circle opened, and panic swallowed my victory before I could reject it. I shouted that Bethesda becoming my subordinate made no sense. Astrea only said a former ruler of the world should not lack strength. Bethesda and I growled at each other inside the spell. One of us clearly needed to die for the other to breathe peacefully again. I begged Astrea to pass and choose someone else, but she laughed and said she wanted to see me in a different position next time. We returned to my foul, cramped cave with one extra disaster beside us. I looked at Bethesda, smelled defeat in the air, and knew this was unacceptable. My demon castle was barely a cave with 3 rooms, and calling it a castle felt like lying to myself. With Bethesda added, even breathing felt crowded. Bethesda sat there like she had swallowed rotten fish, asking if she had truly become my subordinate. I hated that the answer was yes. She once commanded undead armies, death knights, ogres, and balrogs. Now she sat in my cave, stripped of title and forced beside the man she wanted dead. Bethesda muttered that Astrea must be insane, and I told her to shut up before I lost my mind too. For once, we were suffering together. Objectively, Bethesda's power was still absurd. Even without her title, one thought from her could still threaten a kingdom, but she would never obey me. Bethesda looked around and called my castle a storage room. I wanted to deny it, but the cave walls were too close to support my pride. When she said it was smaller than her castle a storage room, I nearly snapped. Then I realized she had to live in this place too. A strange silence settled between us. At the same time, we both admitted it. Living together was going to drive us completely insane. Neither of us could reject the arrangement. I needed her strength to survive, and she needed obedience to reclaim the throne she had lost. Lilith broke the silence first, asking about rooms. To her, Bethesda was not a nightmare but a powerful joker dropped into our weak hand. Lilith explained the rooms: my office and bedroom, her room, and the smallest room for the slimes and succubus. Even order sounded cramped. Then Lilith mentioned the succubus had awakened. I stopped at once, surprised that the sleeping summon had finally become a real problem. Before I could ask where she was, something flew from the cave's end and slammed into my back. I hit the ground before understanding the attack. I thought an assassin had arrived and pushed the figure away, but she clung harder, shouting Demon King with no hatred in her voice. I calmed down when I sensed no hostility. The smiling girl before me had black hair, black eyes, small horns, and wings folded on her back. Mani wriggled on my head like a puppy, claiming it healed her. I asked Lilith what this was, and she answered with useless honesty. Lilith said Mani had awakened hours ago and started singing my title. I decided that answer explained nothing, which made it fit perfectly. When Mani started chewing my hair, I pulled her away and shouted for her to sit. She obeyed instantly, which was the first miracle of the day. Bethesda whistled that the succubus listened well. I ignored the insult and asked Mani if she truly served me, expecting another disaster. Mani declared herself my loyal servant without doubt. It was a blessing and a warning. If a dragon had answered differently, I would have cried blood. I asked if the succubus remembered anything from before, but her confused struggle gave me nothing. Even Bethesda looked more curious than hostile. Bethesda studied the summon and called it fascinating, not a contract at all. I told her not to ask me, because ignorance was my specialty now. She begged me to name her, so I chose Suku with all the creativity of a tired corpse. Bethesda's mocking admiration cut deeper than expected. I asked what Suku could do, expecting little but hoping for something useful. She proudly said she was immune to physical damage, as expected. Then Suku said she could help me sleep well and had nothing else. I held my head, because even my miracles came wrapped in uselessness. I wanted to abandon everything and run, but I slapped my own cheek back into reason. Demon Kings did not flee from bad luck, apparently. Lilith returned to the rooms, and Suku begged to stay with me. I rejected it immediately, choosing survival over whatever danger that loyalty carried. Bethesda demanded the biggest room, as if losing her throne still left her royal manners untouched. I nearly forgot she was supposed to obey me. She mocked my lack of magic and half-baked ability, saying I should yield. I reminded her of her position, but her smile promised traps. Bethesda revealed the limits. Obey orders, do not attack directly, but traps still existed. Lilith sighed, realizing peace came before conquest. I decided to use my authority anyway and began ordering Bethesda by my name. Before the words landed, chaos struck from the cave. A slime launched onto my face, and the others followed like tiny disasters. My command died under 9 soft bodies clinging to me. I could not peel them off with my own strength. In the end, Lilith rescued me while the slime brothers cried like I had betrayed them. Bethesda stared at the slimes in silence, then whispered that they were cute. The Demon King of Rampage rampage had found our weakest army adorable. Bethesda demanded to touch them, asking why her slimes were never like this. I stared, confused, as my worst enemy melted before jelly. She agreed to share any room with the slimes, small or large. I accepted immediately because for once the madness had solved a problem. I asked about the area outside, pressing my forehead. Lilith said the villagers would not notice us unless someone skilled examined the barrier. If humans discovered us, the local lord, church, adventurers, and heroes would follow. A weak demon king could die before his first week ended. For surface demon kings, hiding the castle mattered more than pride. Power meant little if adventurers swarmed before an army could grow. Lilith admitted the castle was perfectly placed, though small. I chose efficiency over grandeur, and now survival demanded I make this cave into a fortress.